Why do we crave likes and validation online, yet feel emptier the more we chase them? In a world obsessed with approval, the real rebellion is choosing to live by your own truth. Society tells you to keep the peace, to say yes, to be agreeable. But what if constantly pleasing others is the very thing destroying your self-respect? We've been taught that silence means weakness. But what if silence is actually the most powerful statement you could ever make? Welcome to StoicCraft, the place where timeless Stoic wisdom meets the challenges of our modern lives. Here we don't just talk philosophy, we use it as a weapon against the noise, pressure, and false expectations of today's world. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that you don't need anyone's approval anymore. Not from your friends, not from your boss, not even from the people who once made you question your worth. Picture the weight that would lift off your shoulders if, for the first time, you could walk through your day with your head held high, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you finally know who you are and what you stand for. There's no bending your voice just to fit the mood of the room, no swallowing your truth just to avoid ruffling feathers. Instead, you speak with clarity, act with intention, and move through the world with integrity, even if no one notices. Especially if no one notices. But let me ask you honestly, how much of your life has been quietly shaped by the fear of not being liked? How many times have you traded your peace just to avoid letting someone down? It creeps in so subtly that we barely notice it. From the time we're children, society whispers that to belong we must please, that to be loved we must perform. And before we even realize it, we stop living authentically and start auditioning for approval. The Stoics warned use about this trap. Real growth doesn't come from applause or recognition. It comes the moment you stop letting public opinion dictate your private decisions. That's the turning point, when you stop chasing approval and start earning something far more valuable, respect. And not the kind of respect that shouts loudly or thrives on attention. I'm talking about the quiet respect that's built in silence, forged under pressure, strengthened through boundaries, and anchored in truth. So if you're tired of performing for an audience that will never truly understand you, if you're ready to trade noise for clarity and appearances for peace, then this message is for you. And if you're new here, welcome to StoicCraft. This is the space where we turn pain into wisdom, noise into stillness, and approval-seeking into self-respect. Because every small step you take toward clarity and principle is a step toward a life you can finally stand behind. Think about it. How many times have you said yes when everything inside you screamed no? Not because you wanted to, not because it felt aligned, but because the thought of disappointing someone made your chest tighten. We've all done it. You nod, you smile, you tell yourself it's no big deal. You convince yourself that being flexible makes you a good person, that being liked means you're doing something right. But deep down, you know the truth. Every time you silence that no, you bury a piece of yourself. And those buried truths don't disappear, they wait. Approval can feel safe, like a soft place to land. But let's be clear, approval isn't peace. It's permission, and permission always has a cost. That cost isn't always obvious. It's not just your time or your energy. The real cost is your identity, diluted little by little until you no longer know where you end and others begin. You mistake accommodation for integrity. You call it compassion, telling yourself it's better to keep the peace than stir conflict. But what if that peace is nothing more than a lie? What if it's not peace at all but quiet submission dressed up in polite language? Here's the reality. You cannot build a solid, meaningful life while walking on eggshells. It doesn't start with dramatic betrayals. It starts small, a compromise here, a silence there, a softening of your opinion just to avoid standing out. And then, without realizing it, you've become someone unrecognizable to yourself. That's when the true discomfort sets in, not from outside criticism, but from the nagging voice within. No matter how much applause you earn, that voice knows this isn't the real you, and it doesn't go away. It grows louder in the stillness, in those late-night moments when the clapping stops and the masks slip. It reminds you of everything you've given up just to be accepted. And here's the cruelest part. People-pleasing doesn't even guarantee peace. You can be agreeable, polite, generous, and still be disliked. You can shrink yourself to fit neatly into someone else's comfort zone, and they may still walk away, because approval isn't love. Approval isn't truth. Approval is conditional, changing with moods, opinions, and misunderstandings. Respect, however, is different. Respect is rarely comfortable, but it's steady. It isn't earned by agreement, it's earned by alignment. But let's be honest with ourselves. It's hard to let go of the need to be liked. For many of us, approval looks like love and rejection feels like abandonment, especially if we grew up believing that acceptance equaled safety. So we learn to perform, to read the room, to say the right things, to avoid friction. We become masters of emotional diplomacy, skilled at managing everyone else's comfort. But in the process, we slowly disappear, because when your voice is shaped more by the expectations of others than by your own convictions, your identity becomes hollow. As Kierkegaard once said, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. And it's true. What's worse is that approval becomes addictive. Each compliment, each nod, each like feels like a hit of validation, a small dose of "I'm okay." But it doesn't last, and the moment someone disapproves, the illusion crumbles. So you chase it again, adjusting, strategizing, asking yourself, what should I say? How should I act? But these questions take you further away from yourself. They replace truth with performance, presence with pretense. There comes a moment in everyone's life when the applause they've been chasing starts to sound empty. When they realize the approval they fought for doesn't mean what they thought it did. It's fickle, fleeting, and often handed out as a reward for conformity, not authenticity. And if you're brave enough to face that moment, you'll begin asking a better question. Who am I when I'm not performing? What would it look like to stop chasing approval and start standing in truth? Epictetus said it best. If you want to be free, learn to live without the admiration of others. That's the core of freedom. Not reckless independence, but rootedness. Not doing whatever you want, but being so grounded in who you are that no one else's opinion can define you. Of course, letting go of approval doesn't mean becoming careless or cruel. It doesn't mean shutting people out just to prove you're strong. It doesn't mean rejecting others for the sake of rebellion. It means living from a place of principle instead of pressure. It means knowing what you value and letting those values, not passing opinions or fleeting, Emotions direct your path. It means having the courage to be disliked for the right reasons rather than being liked for the wrong ones. That isn't arrogance. That isn't rebellion. That's responsibility. The responsibility to stand for something solid even when others question you. And they will. People will say you've changed. Some will call you selfish. Others will resent the boundaries you've drawn. But what they're really saying is that they've grown comfortable with the version of you that existed to meet their needs, not your own. When you stop performing, when you stop bending to please, the people who benefited from your constant accommodation will feel threatened. That's okay. Their discomfort isn't proof of your failure. It's proof of your progress, because real respect is rarely loud or immediate. It comes later, after the noise fades, after the boundaries are clear, after you've stopped explaining yourself. And here's the beauty of it. When you stop needing approval, the relationships that remain are rooted in something far deeper. They become anchored in honesty, mutual respect, and trust. You stop wasting energy trying to prove yourself worthy, and you start investing that energy in actually being yourself. And that shift changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Your words carry more weight. You move with more calm, not because life suddenly got easier, but because you've stopped editing yourself for every room you walk into. There's a strength that grows in silence, the kind of strength that allows you to say no without guilt, to speak truth without apology, to walk away without fear. That strength doesn't come from fighting others. It comes from no longer fighting yourself. And once you've tasted that kind of freedom, no amount of applause or validation can replace it. This is what real power feels like. Not power that dominates, manipulates, or controls, but power that doesn't waver. Power that listens, reflects, and chooses not out of fear, but out of alignment. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He was right. Terrifying, yes, but also liberating. Because once you accept yourself fully, you realize something profound. The world doesn't need your performance. It needs your presence. It doesn't need another agreeable echo. It doesn't need you to shapeshift into someone else's comfort zone. What the world needs, what you need, is your grounded truth. Even if it's quiet, even if it's misunderstood, even if it stands alone. You weren't born to fit into every room. You were born to stand firm in who you are, to live with purpose, to act with integrity, to build a life that doesn't depend on applause to feel worthy. So the next time you feel that familiar pull, the pull, to shrink, to soften, to be liked, pause and ask yourself, what am I trading for this approval? And is it really worth the cost? Because here's the truth. Nothing feels more like home than being yourself. And once you build that home, you'll never again need to go searching for shelter in someone else's approval. Think about it. You try so hard to be what you believe they'll accept. You shift your tone. You soften your opinions. You make yourself easier to be around. You adjust, filter, and accommodate, hoping it will secure your place in someone else's world. You tell yourself it's compromise. You tell yourself it's maturity. You even tell yourself it's love. But in the quiet moments, a question lingers. If they like this version of me, do they even know me at all? That's a painful question because it forces you to confront a truth. We'd rather avoid that sometimes even your best performance doesn't get you the role. Even when you try to be exactly what someone seems to want, gentle, low maintenance, agreeable, they can still walk away. And when that happens, the pain cuts deeper than simple rejection. It's the sting of exposure, because the version of you they rejected wasn't even your full, unfiltered self. It was an edited version, carefully shaped for approval. And yet it still wasn't enough. That moment leaves you wondering, should you have shown more of yourself or less? Something different altogether? But that's the trap, because it was never about you not being enough. It was about them never being capable of receiving you fully. The rejection doesn't just hit your heart. It shatters the identity you built on borrowed expectations. You second-guess your every step. One cold look, one unanswered text, one wrong word, and suddenly you're spiraling. Not because of what they did, but because you built your sense of self on shifting sand. This is the illusion of acceptance. It feels warm, it feels secure, but it's fragile. It depends on you keeping up the image, the tone, the energy that others prefer. And the moment that energy shifts, so does the connection. That's not acceptance. That's approval masquerading as love. And Carl Jung captured the cost of this illusion when he wrote, "The greatest tragedy of a family is the unlived lives of the parents." But this isn't just about family, it's about every space where people bury themselves under the weight of expectations. Every place where you trade your aliveness for approval. And here's the bitter irony. When you perform for too long, you eventually lose track of what your actual voice sounds like. You start confusing your preferences with theirs. You hesitate before speaking. Not because you're reflecting, but because you're editing. You soften your instincts, you polish your truths, and little by little, that habit of editing becomes your identity. You tell yourself, "I'm just easygoing," or "I don't really mind." But in reality, you've simply forgotten what you do want, what you do believe, and where your true boundaries lie. And the greatest danger isn't just that others stop seeing you. It's that you stop seeing yourself. And when it ends, when someone leaves, pulls back, or simply stops trying, you're not just left with their absence. You're left unraveling. Because now the questions creep in. If this didn't work, then what would have? Was I too much? Was I not enough? Did I give too little, or did I give too much? But those are the wrong questions. The real wound isn't rejection itself, it's rejection while you were hiding. You never even gave your true self a chance to be accepted. You were rejected for the mask, the edited version, the careful performance. And now you'll never know if the real you would have been enough. That realization cuts deeper than any goodbye. Marcus Aurelius warned us long ago, never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Yet how many of us do exactly that? How often do we trade our self-respect for scraps of attention? How often do we call it love, call it connection, when in truth it's nothing more than performance? Here's what we miss. Real acceptance doesn't demand constant effort. It doesn't punish you the moment you slip out of character. It doesn't vanish the second you have a bad day, speak your mind, or dare to say no. Real acceptance creates space. It allows your edges to show. It welcomes not just the easy parts, but the complicated, messy, and raw ones too. But when you're trapped in the illusion of people-pleasing, you don't see that. You think performance will protect you. But it doesn't, it only postpones the pain. It stretches out the suffering, because even if someone stays for a while, you know deep down they're not staying with you. They're staying with the role you've been playing. And that anxiety is relentless. You feel it every time you walk away from a conversation, replaying each word in your head, wondering if you said too much. You feel it in the brief wave of relief when they text back and the sharp panic when they don't. That isn't love, that's fear management. And it's exhausting, so eventually you have to face the question, what's worse, being rejected for who you are or being accepted for who you're not? One pain is sharp but honest. The other is slow, draining, and leaves you living a life that never feels like yours. When you stop performing, yes, you risk misunderstanding. You risk losing people. But what you gain in return is clarity. You gain strength. You start to trust the sound of your own voice again. You breathe deeper, not because the world finally approves of you, but because you no longer need it to. That's the beginning of true freedom. To realize that acceptance isn't something you beg for. It's something you build within. And when you begin to show up as you really are, not the polished, safe, acceptable version, but the raw and truthful one, you will lose people. But you'll also attract the ones who never needed the performance in the first place. And those are the only ones worth keeping. The rest, they were only ever in love with the script, not with the actor. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's exactly what approval chasing does. It tricks you into believing your pain is bad luck, when really it's a pattern you've been replaying unconsciously. But once you see the pattern, you can choose differently. You can stop waiting to be chosen and finally choose yourself. There is no perfect formula for guaranteed love, no flawless behavior to prevent abandonment. But what you can control, what you always control, is the energy you bring into your life. You can decide to stop offering a watered-down version of yourself and start offering your full, flawed, honest, sometimes difficult, but always real self. That is not just courage, that is liberation. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you'll never go back to performing again. Because here's the paradox. The pain of being fully seen and not accepted hurts, but it also heals. It strips away the mask and shows you that you never had to edit yourself to earn love, that you were already enough, even when no one was clapping. The moment you stop chasing applause, you start cultivating self-respect. And self-respect more than comfort, more than approval, more than temporary validation. That's the soil a real life grows from. Yet here's the subtle danger. People-pleasing doesn't just feel safe, it often feels noble. It feels humble, even selfless. You tell yourself you're easier to be around. You tell yourself you're helping others feel comfortable, smoothing over tension, lowering your needs. And in return, people smile. They thank you. They praise you for being agreeable. But what they're really praising isn't you. It's the fact that you require so little. And deep down, you feel it. You're not being celebrated for who you are. You're being tolerated for how little trouble you cause. And that's not peace. That's performance. That's not connection. That's self-erasure. Because every smile you earn comes at the cost of your truth. The longer you wear that mask, the more you forget where it ends and where you begin. You convince yourself that you're avoiding conflict. But the truth, you're avoiding clarity. You fear that honesty will hurt feelings, that it will push people away, so you soften, you dilute. You frame your truth in smaller, safer words. And what begins as a one-time compromise quickly calcifies into a habit, into a lifestyle. Marcus Aurelius warned us long ago, never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Yet how many of us do exactly that? How often do we trade our self-respect for scraps of attention? How often do we call it love, call it connection, when in truth it's nothing more than performance? Here's what we miss. Real acceptance doesn't demand constant effort. It doesn't punish you the moment you slip out of character. It doesn't vanish the second you have a bad day, speak your mind, or dare to say no. Real acceptance creates space. It allows your edges to show. It welcomes not just the easy parts, but the complicated, messy, and raw ones too. But when you're trapped in the illusion of people-pleasing, you don't see that. You think performance will protect you, but it doesn't. It only postpones the pain. It stretches out the suffering, because even if someone stays for a while, you know deep down they're not staying with you. They're staying with the role you've been playing, and that anxiety is relentless. You feel it every time you walk away from a conversation, replaying each word in your head, wondering if you said too much. You feel it in the brief wave of relief when they text back and the sharp panic when they don't. That isn't love, that's fear management. And it's exhausting. So eventually, you have to face the question, what's worse, being rejected for who you are, or being accepted for who you're not? One pain is sharp but honest. The other is slow, draining, and leaves you living a life that never feels like yours. When you stop performing, yes, you risk misunderstanding. You risk losing people. But what you gain in return is clarity. You gain strength. You start to trust the sound of your own voice again. You breathe deeper, not because the world finally approves of you, but because you no longer need it to. That's the beginning of true freedom, to realize that acceptance isn't something you beg for, it's something you build within. And when you begin to show up as you really are, not the polished, safe, acceptable version, but the raw and truthful one, you will lose people. But you'll also attract the ones who never needed the performance in the first place. And those are the only ones worth keeping. The rest, they were only ever in love with the script, not with the actor. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's exactly what approval chasing does. It tricks you into believing your pain is bad luck, when really it's a pattern you've been replaying unconsciously. But once you see the pattern, you can choose differently. You can stop waiting to be chosen and finally choose yourself. There is no perfect formula for guaranteed love, no flawless behavior to prevent abandonment. But what you can control, what you always control, is the energy you bring into your life. You can decide to stop offering a watered-down version of yourself and start offering your full, flawed, honest, sometimes difficult, but always real self. That is not just courage, that is liberation. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you'll never go back to performing again. Because here's the paradox. The pain of being fully seen and not accepted hurts, but it also heals. It strips away the mask and shows you that you never had to edit yourself to earn love, that you were already enough even when no one was clapping. The moment you stop chasing applause, you start cultivating self-respect. And self-respect more than comfort, more than approval, more than temporary validation. That's the soil a real life grows from. Yet here's the subtle danger. People-pleasing doesn't just feel safe, it often feels noble. It feels humble, even selfless. You tell yourself you're easier to be around. You tell yourself you're helping others feel comfortable, smoothing over tension, lowering your needs. And in return, people smile. They thank you. They praise you for being agreeable. But what they're really praising isn't you, it's the fact that you require so little. And deep down, you feel it. You're not being celebrated for who you are. You're being tolerated for how little trouble you cause. And that's not peace. That's performance. That's not connection. That's self-erasure. Because every smile you earn comes at the cost of your truth. The longer you wear that mask, the more you forget where it ends and where you begin. You convince yourself that you're avoiding conflict, but the truth, you're avoiding clarity. You fear that honesty will hurt feelings, that it will push people away, so you soften, you dilute. You frame your truth in smaller, safer words, and what begins as a one-time compromise quickly calcifies into a habit, into a lifestyle. You learn to read people's energy like a radar. The slightest shift in tone, the smallest change in body language, and you adjust yourself immediately. But with every small edit you make, you drift further from yourself. You're not being kind, you're being careful. And care that consistently erases your inner world isn't kindness at all. It's self-abandonment. There's a subtle kind of sadness that creeps in when your so-called peace depends on other people's comfort. It's not a loud sadness. It doesn't explode. It sighs. It lingers. It shows up when you walk away from a conversation and everyone else seems satisfied, yet you feel strangely empty inside. It surfaces when you agree to plans you don't want, only to lie awake later asking yourself, why did I say yes again? It appears in the quietest moments, in the way you hesitate before speaking, in the way you convince yourself not to ask for what you truly need, in the way you smile politely while something inside you is screaming for honesty. Each of these moments feels small, harmless, insignificant, but they pile up brick by brick until you realize you've built a wall between yourself and your own voice. And one day you look in the mirror and wonder, when did I become a stranger to myself? Here's the truth. Peace isn't the absence of disagreement, it's the presence of truth. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But people-pleasing makes this nearly impossible. You end up doing things that aren't right for you just to avoid friction. You say words you don't fully mean just to keep things smooth. You start confusing comfort with harmony, when in reality, true harmony doesn't demand silence. It doesn't ask you to shrink. It asks you to show up honestly, respectfully, and without burying your truth until it's unrecognizable. And here's the line too. Many of us blur. There's a difference between being kind and being invisible. True kindness requires presence, not disappearance. It flows from choice, not fear. But when your kindness is powered by fear of disapproval or discomfort, it's no longer kindness, it's self-protection. And while self-protection is natural, in moments of danger, it becomes corrosive when it's your constant way of living. Because eventually you forget what you're even protecting anymore. You forget who you were before you started molding yourself to fit every room. You forget what it feels like to speak freely without rehearsing, to act with conviction, to stand in your own shoes without glancing around for permission. And the consequences are heavier than they appear, because the more you silence yourself, the more resentment builds, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You start to resent the version of you that always smiles through the discomfort, that always says yes, that always puts everyone else first. Outwardly, you call yourself easygoing, but inwardly, there's tension, frustration, and a quiet desperation to finally be seen, to finally be heard, to finally be allowed to be real. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That's the loneliness people-pleasing creates. It makes you invisible, even in a crowded room. It traps what's important to you beneath layers of politeness, compromise, and emotional editing. You end up lonely not because you lack connection, but because your connections lack authenticity. And the most painful part? Most people won't even notice. They'll happily enjoy the version of you that never disagrees, that always adapts, that avoids friction. They'll appreciate your warmth, your willingness, your soft edges, but they'll never see the parts of you that remain buried. They don't realize how much of yourself you've sacrificed just to keep things smooth until one day you stop. You hit a breaking point. You begin to speak up or you start pulling back. Suddenly, people look at you and say, "You've changed." But you haven't changed, you've simply stopped hiding. And that's where the real tension begins. Not because you've become difficult, but because you've started being honest. And honesty, after years of self-erasure, can feel jarring. At first, even to yourself, directness feels like conflict. But it's not conflict, it's clarity. And clarity, though uncomfortable at first, is one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself and to others. Because when you start speaking your truth, even imperfectly, you create space for others to do the same. You open the door for real connection. Not surface-level agreement, not polite nods, but genuine understanding. And here's the hard part. Sometimes that understanding reveals that certain relationships were built entirely on your silence. And when the silence ends, so does the relationship. That's painful, but it's not failure. It's truth sorting itself out. The beauty of letting go of people-pleasing is that your energy begins to return. You no longer waste hours monitoring yourself, editing every sentence, anticipating every reaction. You stop walking on eggshells and start walking firmly on your own 2 feet. You stop second-guessing your every word and begin trusting them. You speak not to be accepted, but to be clear. And yes, you might lose some smiles. But what you gain is far more valuable. Peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's reaction. Peace that comes from living in alignment with your values. Peace that whispers, "I stood by what was true, even if it wasn't comfortable." And here's the paradox most miss. The people who can meet you in that space, the ones who don't need you to perform in order to love you, those are the ones who will finally give you something real. everyone else will drift away. And that's not your loss. It's your freedom. Because betraying yourself for approval doesn't just erode your peace, it erodes your self-respect. And once your self-respect is gone, you'll always look outside yourself for stability, for validation, for a sense of worth. But the world is too unstable to give you those things consistently. True peace isn't about keeping everyone comfortable. True peace is quiet. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It's the calm assurance of knowing you showed up honestly, even when it was hard. And that kind of peace will always outlast the fragile approval of others. The rest may fall away. And that's okay. Let them. Not because you're better than anyone, not because you've suddenly become cold, but because you've finally outgrown the need to keep earning a seat at tables that were never meant for you. The truth is, pleasing people never really feels like peace. At best, it feels like temporary relief, like taking a painkiller that numbs the ache but never heals the wound. It might look like approval on the surface, but it's not peace. Real peace begins when your inner world stops clawing for attention, when your actions no longer betray your own heart just to soothe someone else's feelings. Peace comes when you walk through your day not wondering what others might be whispering about you, but remembering what you already know, that you are enough as you are, that your truth is not a problem to be solved or edited down, it is a voice to be honored. And honoring that voice doesn't happen in one dramatic, cinematic moment. It happens quietly, consistently, in the small decisions where you choose authenticity over approval, clarity over comfort, presence over performance. That kind of peace can never be taken from you because it doesn't live in other people's hands. It lives in your own. It starts so innocently. You do something nice for someone. You say what they want to hear. They smile. You feel good. You feel seen. And that feeling, it's addictive. At first, it's just a strategy to get by, to fit in, to make things smoother. But over time, that small strategy hardens into a way of life. Without realizing it, you begin scanning every room for cues. You read people's faces, adjust your words, soften your tone. Every sentence becomes calculated, every choice shaped not by your convictions, but by your predictions of how others will react. The question slowly shifts from, "What do I believe?" to "What will they think?" And once that shift takes root, you begin molding yourself, not according to your values, but to the expectations of those around you. It doesn't happen overnight. It's like erosion, slow, subtle, almost invisible, but relentless. It begins with small adjustments, keeping quiet during a meeting to avoid rocking the boat, laughing at a joke you don't actually find funny, saying yes when your gut screamed no. You tell yourself it's nothing serious. You call it consideration. You call it maturity. But slowly what began as a tool for connection becomes an unconscious dependence. And here's the danger. You stop noticing the shift. You adapt, not just in big moments, but in every moment. You read the room not to understand it, but to predict how to stay in it. You say what you think others want to hear, and eventually, you lose track of whether the words you're speaking are even your own. That's the point, where approval becomes your compass. And at first, it feels harmless. You're not hurting anyone, right? You're just being nice, just keeping things peaceful. But here's the cost. Every time you align your choices with someone else's expectations, You drift further from your own truth. What began as kindness turns into self-erasure. What began as courtesy turns into fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being invisible. Ironically, that fear is what makes you invisible, because when your compass points to approval instead of authenticity, you stop showing up as yourself. And when you stop showing up, people don't actually see you. They see the mask you wear. You might feel like you're drawing closer to others, but really you're disappearing. Piece by piece, you become less visible to them, and even less visible to yourself. You no longer live from your truth, but from a script of performance tailored to avoid conflict, to earn applause, to guarantee acceptance. And while that script may win you temporary validation, it can never give you the depth of connection you're truly searching for. Because connection, built on performance, isn't connection at all, it's dependency. And here's where the loneliness creeps in. Not because you're alone, but because you're absent from yourself. You start to feel less like a person with a soul and more like a mirror, reflecting back whatever others want to see. That's when the real ache sets in, not the ache of losing people, but the ache of losing yourself. When approval becomes your compass, you surrender the only voice that matters, your own. You stop asking, "What is true for me?" and instead ask, "What's the safest thing to say right now? What will make them comfortable?" And that's the tragedy. You can still do all the right things, but for the wrong reasons. You can still be polite, still be helpful, still be agreeable, but none of it comes from authenticity. It comes from fear, and fear cannot build a life worth living. The Stoics would tell you this: true peace doesn't come from avoiding discomfort or collecting approval like trophies. It comes from standing firm in your own truth, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs you something. Because only when you choose to root yourself in principle rather than performance do you finally stop living someone else's version of your life. That's when you remember what freedom actually feels like. It comes from knowing who you are, regardless of who is watching or how they might react. This dependency on approval isn't just about avoiding discomfort, it's about avoiding conflict with yourself. And that silent avoidance, repeated over and over, begins to tear you apart from the inside. It's easy to put others' needs first. It feels noble, safe, even rewarding in the short term. But in the long run, it drains you of energy and of the very essence of who you are. Every time you put someone else's expectations ahead of your own truth, you hand away a small piece of your power. Do it long enough and you'll wake up one day wondering, who am I really underneath all these masks? What do I truly believe without someone else's stamp of approval? And here's the hard truth. Approval seeking never leads to the peace you crave. Instead, it locks you into a constant negotiation between who you are and who you think you should be. The peace you're chasing doesn't come from bending, pleasing, or performing. It comes from the courage to be real with yourself first. It comes from releasing the obsession with being accepted by everyone and embracing the deeper necessity of accepting yourself. You don't need their applause to feel worthy. You don't need to twist yourself into someone else's version of acceptable just to belong. The only belonging that matters is belonging to yourself. And here's the paradox. When you stop tailoring your life to please, something shifts. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even risky, like walking into a room without armor, without a script, without the safety net of knowing you'll be liked. But slowly you begin to feel the weight lifting. You stop feeling like you're always performing. You stop scanning faces for signs of validation. You stop living like you're on trial. And in that freedom, you find something you didn't expect. Peace. Not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the solid peace of standing in your truth. Peace that doesn't wobble when someone disapproves. Peace that doesn't vanish when people misunderstand you. This isn't the end of your need for connection. Stoicism never told us to isolate ourselves, but it is the end of building your worth on whether or not others approve. Because here's the truth. Approval is a crutch. It's the illusion of safety. You may get it, you may even enjoy it, but every moment spent clinging to it comes at the cost of your essence. The path to real connection, real freedom, and real peace begins only when you let go of that crutch and learn to stand on your own voice. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus spoke of a subtle kind of slavery, the slavery of needing approval. It isn't the slavery of chains or prisons. It's the kind you carry in your own habits, in your own choices. It's the way you lower your voice to avoid offending someone, even when your conviction is burning inside you. It's the way you curate your social media posts, polishing them to look more insightful, more acceptable, as if your raw truth isn't worthy of being seen. It's the way you force a smile through discomfort, nod politely through disagreement, bite your tongue when you want to speak up just to keep the peace. These compromises may look harmless, even polite, but they come with a price. They are chains of self-censorship. Not chains that the world places on you, but chains you tighten around yourself. With every small compromise, you give away a little freedom. Until one day, you realize the world didn't need to silence you. You silenced yourself. That's what makes this form of slavery so insidious. It feels natural. It feels like thoughtfulness. You tell yourself you're being considerate, mature, kind. But every time you edit your truth, you trim away pieces of your identity. You begin wearing masks so often that you forget what your real face even looks like. And here's the tragedy. In your effort to be liked, to be accepted, to be seen as good, you lose the very thing that made you valuable in the first place, your authentic self. Over the years, as you bend and shift for approval, that original self begins to fade. And when you finally look back, you realize you've spent more energy being everyone's version of you than being your own. The original you becomes buried under layers of social conformity, hidden beneath the endless pressure of what everyone else expects of you. And it happens so quietly that most people don't even notice it. We've all been there rewriting a message a dozen times before posting it, checking tone and punctuation, not because it reflects what we truly think, but because we're terrified of how it might be received. We polish, we soften, we bend. We nod when we should speak up. We smile when frustration burns inside, all for the sake of one fragile currency, approval. But here's the harsh reality. Approval never fills you up the way you imagine it will. It's a quick hit, like sugar or caffeine. It gives you a rush, makes you feel accepted for a moment, but then it crashes. And in the silence after the applause fades, you're left with the same question. Who am I, really? This slavery to likability thrives on insecurity. It feeds on the fear of rejection, the fear of being cast aside, the fear of standing alone. And the tragedy is, the more you bend yourself to fit into others' expectations, the less you actually grow. You're not expanding into your full potential, you're shrinking. Shrinking your voice, your originality, your inner fire. Slowly, without noticing, you become trapped in an endless cycle of self-editing, self-censorship, and self-doubt. Each compromise, each subtle adjustment you make just to avoid rocking the boat, becomes another brick in the wall between you and your authentic self. You don't even realize you're building a prison until one day you look around and see the walls closing in. As Nietzsche once warned, he who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. The same is true of approval seeking. In your struggle to be liked, you risk becoming unrecognizable even to yourself. When you live for others' acceptance, you lose touch with your own desires, your goals, your principles. You begin living as a reflection of other people's comfort, rather than as the author of your own life. That is the most devastating kind of estrangement, not being abandoned by others, but abandoning yourself. Real freedom doesn't come when everyone approves of you. It comes when you stop needing them to, when you finally stand firm in your truth, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it goes against the status quo, even if it means standing alone. It's not rebellion, it's self-respect. It's the quiet declaration, this is who I am, and I will not apologize for it. Not everyone will like you, not everyone will agree with you, and that's not only acceptable, it's inevitable. The world doesn't need more agreeable echoes. It needs people who stand rooted in their own values, people who can speak truth without performance, people who understand that peace doesn't come from applause but from authenticity. And here's the paradox. When you stop performing, when you let go of the endless hunger for approval, that's when you begin to attract the people who matter most, the ones who don't need the mask, the ones who don't require the performance, the ones who recognize and value you as you are, not as you pretend to be. So the next time you feel the urge to edit your words, to dim your truth, to smooth your edges just to fit in, pause. Ask yourself, am I giving away my voice just for a nod of approval? Am I handing over the pen of my story to someone else? Because that's what approval seeking really is. It's letting others write your script. When you live this way, every compliment becomes a drug, every silence a threat, every disapproving glance a wound. Your self-worth rises and falls with the crowd, and you're left breathless, always chasing, never grounded. And the cruelest part, this cycle never ends. The more you seek approval, the more dependent you become on it, like an addict searching for the next fix. But freedom begins the moment you take the pen back, the moment you decide that your story is worth writing in your own voice, without edits for applause, without tailoring for acceptance. That's the shift from slavery to sovereignty. And that's where real peace begins. What if you stopped waiting for the nod, the compliment, or the applause? What if you stopped asking for permission to live, to speak, to create, to exist as you truly are? Imagine how different your life could be if you put down the script others handed you and picked up the pen yourself. That single decision, too, Reclaim authorship of your life changes everything. Because the moment you take control of your narrative, you stop surrendering your value to external forces. You stop living for other people's approval, likes, and comments. Instead, you start living for yourself, guided not by the fleeting standards of the crowd, but by the enduring compass of your own convictions. Reclaiming the pen means you no longer edit your truth to fit someone else's vision. You stop trimming your edges to make others comfortable, and you start carving out your own path, raw, imperfect, but authentic. And something powerful happens when you do this. You begin to trust yourself again. You stop second-guessing every decision and learn to validate your own worth. You realize that you don't need applause to matter. You don't need validation to be valid. Your value isn't a vote to be tallied, it's a truth to be lived. Here's the nuance people often miss. Reclaiming the pen doesn't mean rejecting others entirely. It doesn't mean arrogance, shutting out wisdom, or pretending criticism doesn't sting. It means you no longer let those voices define you. You can listen to feedback without handing it the keys to your identity. You can hear criticism without letting it diminish your worth. That's real strength, the ability to stay open without being hollowed out. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." If your happiness is chained to the shifting thoughts of others, you'll always be restless, anxious, insecure. But when you reclaim the pen, when you anchor your life in your own standards, your own values, your own integrity, you stop outsourcing your peace. Of course, it's not easy. We've been conditioned since childhood to seek approval. At school, fitting in felt like survival. At work, conformity feels like security. Online, validation feels like currency. But what begins as a survival instinct eventually becomes a prison. You start molding your life around others' comfort instead of your own growth. You compromise your beliefs, your actions, even your identity, just to belong. And the more you lose sight of who you were before the mask. So ask yourself, what if, instead of trying to fit the mold, you created your own? What if you stopped shrinking to be liked and stood tall, even if it made others uncomfortable? What if you allowed your flaws and strengths to coexist unapologetically? That's what reclaiming the pen really means. It means owning your story, your voice, your choices. It means refusing to live in someone else's shadow, even if it means walking alone for a while. Think about the people you admire. Do they live in constant fear of rejection? Do they water down their convictions just to be accepted? Or do they carry a quiet confidence, steady in their values, regardless of public opinion? The truth is, the people we respect most are rarely the ones who try to please everyone. They are the ones who have stopped seeking approval altogether. They've found their voice and chosen to live by it. Unapologetic ally. And here's the paradox. They are often the ones who attract the deepest respect, because authenticity resonates in a way performance never can. When you stop begging for approval, you stop performing and start living. You begin to trust yourself. Your confidence grows, your clarity sharpens, and suddenly the world feels lighter, not because it changed, but because you stopped carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. This process won't happen overnight. Reclaiming the pen is a practice. It requires reflection, courage, and patience. It asks you to wrestle with questions like, what do I really believe? What is truly important to me? Who do I want to be when no one else is watching? Those answers won't come from applause or criticism. They'll come from silence, from honesty, from your own inner voice. And once you start answering those questions with courage, something profound begins to shift. You stop performing. You stop apologizing for your existence. You stop bending to fit into a life that was never meant for you. Instead, you start living, fully, unapologetically, and authentically. That is where fulfillment lives, not in approval, but in alignment. So remember this, you don't need validation to be valid. What you need is conviction, the courage to stand in your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable. When you reclaim the pen, you reclaim your power. You stop letting others write your story and you begin writing it yourself, line by line, chapter by chapter. And when you finally take back the pen, you'll notice something profound. The story you write for yourself is far richer, far more authentic, and far more fulfilling than anything someone else could ever script for you. As you move through your day, pause and ask, how often have I handed the pen to others? How many of my choices have been shaped not by my own convictions, but by the invisible pull of approval? And then dare to imagine, what would it look like if I truly wrote my own story? The answer to that question is worth everything. Because when you stop living for applause and start living with conviction, you don't just reclaim the pen, you reclaim your life. But let's clear up a dangerous misconception: confidence. Society has turned it into a performance. We think confidence means the loudest voice in the room, the boldest posture, or the person who can command the biggest audience. But this is an illusion. Real confidence doesn't need volume, theatrics, or masks. It isn't about pretending to be unshakable. True confidence is quieter, deeper, and far more enduring. At its core, confidence is rooted in alignment. It's the peace of knowing that your actions reflect your values, that the person others see is the same person you know within. This kind of confidence is forged in the small, private moments, the times when no one is watching, when it would be easier to bend, easier to compromise, easier to hide, and you still choose to stand firm in your truth. That is where power is born. True confidence doesn't require applause. It doesn't shrink when compliments fade. It doesn't collapse when misunderstood. Because it isn't built on what others think. It's built on the unshakable integrity of living in alignment. Confidence is not a costume you put on to impress. It's the natural radiance of living in congruence. Marcus Aurelius captured it perfectly. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Confidence flows from this exact discipline, the refusal to betray your values, even in small ways. When your inner world and outer actions align, you gain a calm certainty no applause can grant and no criticism can take away. Think back to the moments you felt most confident. Was it really when you were loudest, most noticed, or most admired? Or was it when you stood by your beliefs even though it was unpopular? Was it when you refused to compromise your integrity even when staying silent would have been easier? That's what real confidence feels like. It's not flashy, it's steady. It's not arrogant, it's anchored. But let's be honest, living this way isn't easy. Our world is engineered to keep us addicted to approval. Every like, every share, Every fleeting compliment releases a burst of dopamine that tricks us into believing we're enough until the likes stop, until the applause fades, until the validation dries up. Then, without that external fuel, you're left staring at yourself, uncertain of who you are when no one is clapping. That is the fragility of external confidence. The only antidote is to build a confidence that no one can give you and no one can take away. And that begins with integrity, holding yourself to your values consistently, quietly, even when no one else notices. It's like planting a tree with roots so deep that storms don't shake it. When your confidence is rooted in your principles, you stop swaying with the winds of opinion. You stop bending to every criticism or chasing every compliment. You stand. This doesn't mean life will be easy. In fact, it will often be harder. Living in alignment with your values will sometimes mean standing against the current, challenging the status quo, risking rejection, and bearing misunderstanding. But while that road is harder, it is also freer, because every time you choose your truth over approval, you strengthen your foundation. Every time you act with integrity, you water those deep roots. And over time, you discover that the only confidence worth having is the kind that comes from within. But here's the truth. Confidence is not the absence of challenge. It's not about moving through life untouched or immune to criticism. True confidence is the strength to face difficulty without being dismantled by it. It's the ability to walk into resistance and not lose yourself when the world pushes back. The Stoics understood this at their core. They knew that what people say, how they react, the chaos of everyday life, none of it is truly within our control. Epictetus put it in words that will outlast time. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That is the essence of confidence, not the power to dominate circumstances, but the discipline to govern your own response. When your life is anchored in your values, your response becomes unshakable. It's no longer dictated by the hunger for validation or the fear of rejection. Instead, it springs from a deeper alignment, one that no applause can inflate and no insult can destroy. And this is where many confuse confidence with arrogance. They look similar from a distance, but couldn't be further apart. Arrogance is desperate. It's the constant performance, the need to be admired, the facade put up to mask insecurity. Arrogance lives on external approval. Confidence lives on internal integrity. Arrogance shouts to be seen. Confidence stands silent but undeniable. When you build confidence on integrity, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You don't walk into a room trying to convince people of your worth. You already know it. You don't chase applause because your self-assurance isn't tethered to external recognition. And ironically, this kind of quiet confidence becomes magnetic. People trust it. They're drawn to it. They sense that it's real because it doesn't bend under pressure. That's the root of real confidence, alignment. When your actions mirror your values, when your words echo your convictions, when you stand firm, even when it's hard, that's when confidence shines. It doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't demand attention. It radiates from within, steady, an unshakable dot. And here's the paradox: true power doesn't come from perfection, but from authenticity. Not from looking untouchable, but from being real. Yet many of us don't realize why we feel so drained, so perpetually exhausted, as if life has bled us dry, even when we haven't physically overworked ourselves. That exhaustion isn't from labor, it's from pretending to be fine when you're breaking inside, pretending to agree when your soul is screaming to dissent, pretending to be indifferent when in reality you care deeply. This is not burnout from effort, it's burnout from inauthenticity. The mask you wear may look light, but it's heavier than any burden of labor. And what makes it worse, the mask is optional. No one is forcing you to wear it, yet most of us strap it on every day, not because we are busy, but because we are pretending, and society encourages this masquerade. We are told to smile, to fit in, to blend with the crowd. We're told that compromise is noble and conformity is harmony. But in truth, every time we hide behind the mask, we surrender a piece of ourselves. Every small compromise of integrity, every swallowed truth, every silent nod builds toward exhaustion. Over time, we lose not just energy but essence. What begins as protection shielding us from judgment slowly transforms into a prison. We think we're safe, but we're suffocating. The air is thin inside that mask, and eventually, you forget what it feels like to breathe freely. The most dangerous part is how skilled we become at wearing it. We learn to adapt the mask for each situation: the agreeable coworker, the dutiful child, the endlessly positive friend. But here's the question: what happens when you take the mask off? What happens when you finally dare to show your face, flaws and all? That's where freedom lives. But it's also where discomfort begins, because authenticity is never the easy road. Pretending feels easier in the short term: no conflict, no rejection, no awkward stares. But that is the grand deception. The more you hide, the more weary your soul becomes. This exhaustion isn't physical, it's spiritual. It's the fatigue of living cut off from yourself. You might look fine on the outside, saying the right things, smiling at the right times, but inside you grow hollow. And every day you continue pretending, you drift further from the person you are meant to be. You see, the deepest exhaustion you feel doesn't come from long hours or endless tasks. It comes from losing your connection to your truth. That disconnection is what drains you at the soul level. And interestingly, the Stoics, men who lived thousands of years ago, understood this struggle better than most people today. They recognize that trying to manage the way others perceive you is a futile effort, because no matter how carefully you shape your image, no matter how much you rehearse your words, you can't control the thoughts of another human being. What you can control is how you show up in the world, whether that showing is aligned with your truth or dictated by your fear. The Stoics taught that our worth does not come from applause, likes, or the fleeting approval of the crowd. It comes from living in alignment with our virtues, with integrity, with the voice inside that cannot be silenced. And when you release the endless pursuit of validation, you also release the crushing burnout of wearing the mask. Suddenly you feel lighter. You can breathe again. But let's not pretend it isn't an instant transformation. To live authentically takes real courage. It means being willing to stand exposed, vulnerable, unpolished. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even frightening. You'll wonder, what if they reject me? What if they laugh? What if I lose people I thought I needed? Yet paradoxically, in that raw vulnerability lies your greatest strength. By no longer apologizing for who you are, you unlock a kind of freedom the mask could never offer. The world may not always understand you, but your spirit will thank you. Because every time you choose truth over performance, you shed another layer of weight you were never meant to carry. The problem is, this message rarely comes from society. We are conditioned from the beginning to perform. Think about social media. It's an enormous stage where billions of us carefully curate a highlight reel. We showcase the polished version, the edited photo, the filtered smile, the success story without the failure. We hide the messy, the painful, the raw. We learn to filter our emotions like we filter our photos. We're told to smile even when our heart is breaking, to say we're fine when we're drowning inside. The pressure to maintain this image is relentless. It's like carrying an invisible weight every moment of your life, a weight that only you can feel, but one that quietly exhausts you. And here's the question we rarely stop to ask. Who exactly are we doing this for? Are we really keeping up the mask for ourselves, or are we chasing the fleeting nods of approval from others? The uncomfortable truth is that most of the time, we perform not for survival, but for validation. And that validation is an empty prize. The mask is not saving you, it is draining you. And the most liberating realization is this: the mask is optional. You can take it off. Not all at once, maybe not every day, but moment by moment, act by act. Each time you choose honesty over pretense, each time you let yourself show up as you are, instead of as you're expected to be, the mask slips a little further away. This is where the Stoics give us timeless guidance. They didn't live to please the crowd. They lived to uphold their principles. They weren't selfish, they were aligned. And in that alignment, they discovered resilience, energy, and peace that no applause could ever provide. When you live this way, you reclaim your power. You no longer allow others' opinions to write your script. You stop living as a performance and start living as a person. And the weight that has been crushing you for years begins to dissolve. You realize you don't have to bend into someone else's shape. You don't have to edit yourself down to be palatable. You only have to be who you are, the one person who has always deserved your love, your energy, and your loyalty. But then comes the next reality check: rejection. We can't talk about masks and authenticity without addressing it, because rejection will happen. It stings. It always stings. We've all felt the sharp pain of being passed over, left behind, dismissed, or ignored. Yet here's the thing: rejection isn't painful because of the rejection itself. It's painful because of the story we attach to it. When someone rejects you, the wound isn't in the no itself. It's in the voice inside that says, "I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I've failed." That voice is what truly cuts us. And the irony: that voice only grows louder the more we live for external approval. Because the moment the applause stops or the smile fades, we are left wondering if we have any value at all. Rejection hurts, but not always for the reasons we think. The sharpest pain often doesn't come from the rejection itself, but from the story we attach to it. We script entire narratives in our minds. I wasn't chosen because I'm not good enough. They said no because I'm unworthy. This didn't Work out because I failed. These aren't facts. They're stories. And those stories amplify the sting, turning rejection into something far heavier than it needs to be. But what if the story is wrong? What if rejection isn't a verdict on your value, but a filter? A filter that clears away what doesn't belong to you. Think about it. We interpret rejection as a door slamming shut, a harsh declaration that says you don't belong here. But in reality, rejection often acts as redirection of force that clears obstacles and frees you for what's truly aligned with your life. It's not about what you've lost. It's about what you've been spared from. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Sometimes rejection is the very thing that strips away illusions about what you thought you needed, who you thought you should impress, or the path you assumed was yours. In facing rejection, we're forced to confront our fears, our insecurities, and our attachments. And in that confrontation, we gain freedom. Every no you survive is living proof that you never needed that yes to begin with. Still, let's be honest, the sting is real. Rejection feels personal, especially when it touches something vulnerable. A job application, a relationship, a creative work, even a simple message left unanswered. It's easy to spiral into self-doubt, asking, why wasn't I chosen? Why didn't they like me? Why wasn't I enough? Left unchecked, that spiral convinces us that rejection equals deficiency. But what if that interpretation is the real mistake? What if rejection isn't failure, but feedback, an opportunity to realign our lives with what actually fits us? The Stoics remind us of this truth. Marcus Aurelius said, "Reject your sense of injury, and the injury itself disappears." In other words, the pain lives not in the rejection, but in our interpretation of it. If you reject the story that rejection defines you, then rejection loses its teeth. Too often, the devastation we feel comes from the fact that we've outsourced our worth. We've placed it in the hands of others. We live as if someone else's. Approval is the currency of our value. And when that currency is withheld, we panic. But the truth is, worth cannot be outsourced. When you rely on others to affirm that you're lovable, capable, or strong, you hand them control over your identity. Rejection then becomes a reflection of their judgment rather than an honest measure of your essence. This is why rejection can be such a powerful teacher. It forces us to take stock of where we've placed our self-worth. It calls us to resilience, grounding us again in the only approval that truly matters, our own. It teaches us the art of letting go. Because sometimes what we wanted so desperately was never meant for us at all. Rejection in this light is liberation. It frees us from attachments that no longer serve us, jobs that would have suffocated our creativity, relationships that were out of alignment with our values, opportunities that looked good on paper but would have hollowed us out inside. What feels like loss is often protection. Life is pruning us just like a gardener cuts away branches so the tree can grow stronger. Each no cuts away what is unnecessary so we can channel our energy toward what truly matters. The key is perspective. When you see rejection not as the end of your story, but as part of the refining process, the weight begins to lift. You recognize that rejection redirects you toward something more aligned, something richer in meaning Think of how different your life could look if rejection no longer defined you. Imagine meeting every no, not with despair, but with clarity. If this isn't mine, then something else is waiting. How much peace would that perspective bring? How much energy would it free? The psychologist Carl Jung reminded us, what you resist persists. When we resist rejection, when we clutch it, replay it, and define ourselves by it, we magnify its power. But when we embrace it, when we see rejection as part of the natural rhythm of life, its grip loosens. It becomes less of a wound and more of a stepping stone, because in the end, rejection is not a verdict on who you are. It is not a declaration of your inadequacy. It is simply a redirection, a part of the process, leading you toward greater clarity, deeper alignment, and a stronger sense of self. Every no you outlive becomes undeniable evidence. You never needed that approval in the first place. When we fully embrace this truth, that rejection is not an enemy, but a teacher, we begin to walk through life with a kind of inner calm that no can strip away. Instead of shrinking from rejection, we start to welcome it as a catalyst. Each refusal cuts away a layer of illusion, a false identity, or an unnecessary burden, bringing us closer to who we really are. Rejection stops being a punishment and becomes a guide. But if rejection is a teacher, fear is its twin. Picture the moments when fear gnaws at you right before a leap, before you confess a truth. Step into the or risk disapproval. That voice in your head is relentless. What if I fail? What if they don't like me? What if I'm wrong? Fear tightens its grip and convinces you to stay still, to remain safe, to never risk being seen. The Stoics had an antidote for this paralysis. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. To modern ears it sounds grim, almost cynical, but the wisdom is profound. It is not about wallowing in negativity or creating a doomsday fantasy. It is about stripping fear of its power by confronting it directly in your imagination. By rehearsing the worst-case scenarios, you rob them of their ability to ambush you. Carl Jung once observed, "The greatest and most important problems of life are not the ones that come unexpectedly, but the ones that we refuse to acknowledge." Fear feeds on avoidance. When you refuse to name it, fear grows in the shadows. But when you drag it into the light, when you say aloud, "Yes, I might be criticized. Yes, I might fail. Yes, they might reject me," you rob it of its mystery. The fear doesn't vanish, but it loses its sting. Think about how many opportunities you've delayed, not because you weren't capable, but because the fear whispered, "Too hard, too risky, too uncertain." And yet, when you finally faced those challenges, they were rarely as catastrophic as your imagination suggested. The same principle applies to rejection, criticism, or failure. When you imagine them beforehand, you build resilience in advance. You transform fear from a paralyzing unknown into a challenge you are already prepared to meet. The beauty of this practice is what it does to your self-concept. If you can picture the worst and still know that you will stand, breathe, and move forward, you begin to realize that your worth was never tied to the outcome in the first place. It was never tied to applause, approval, or acceptance. Your worth lies in how you act in alignment with your principles, even when fear stands in front of you. That is where true power is born, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Consider the great figures of history, the leaders, thinkers, and creators we admire. Do we imagine they lived without fear? Hardly. The difference was that they did not allow fear of criticism or rejection to stop them. They faced it, acknowledged it, and kept moving forward anyway. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why is that terrifying? Because it demands total honesty. It means staring at your flaws, your insecurities, and your limitations and still deciding, I am enough. That kind of acceptance dismantles fear at its root. When you embrace yourself fully, you stop fearing rejection because rejection can no longer define you. Think back to a difficult moment in your own life, perhaps a presentation at work, a confession in a relationship, or a leap of faith into something uncertain. Beforehand, your mind might have been racing with worst-case scenarios. What if I embarrass myself? What if they laugh? What if I fail? But the moment you played those fears through, you realized they weren't as devastating as you believed. You saw that even if those outcomes came true, you would still stand, still breathe, still live to fight another day. This is the essence of premeditatio malorum. It's not about being pessimistic. It's about preparing yourself so thoroughly that fear no longer has the power to hijack your life. By imagining the worst, you discover the strength to endure it. And with that strength, you can finally walk forward, unshaken by the unknown. The beauty of this practice is that it doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't require you to be fearless or flawless. All it asks is for your honesty, your willingness to look fear in the eye, step into the discomfort, and still choose to act with intention. And each time you do this, each time you refuse to run from the fear, you build a resilience that no one can take from you. Over time, it becomes unshakable. This doesn't mean rejection or criticism suddenly stop hurting. The sting of a no, the ache of a misstep will always be there. But when you've rehearsed these moments in your mind, when you've faced them in advance, you've already built the shield. You can feel the sting without being destroyed by it, and that's when a profound shift happens. You stop needing approval to validate your existence. You stop outsourcing your worth to the applause or silence of the crowd. Your value is grounded in something unshakable, the integrity of your own actions. When you stand in your truth, when you act in spite of fear, you take back the authorship of your life. You stop waiting for someone else to hand you permission to live. That is where true freedom lives. You don't need permission to be yourself anymore. You don't need someone else to approve your choices. You've already given yourself that permission, and once you do, fear loosens its grip. The Stoics were right. It is not the events themselves that disturb us, but the stories we attach to them. Rejection, failure, criticism, they are all part of the human experience. They cannot define you unless you allow them to. When you train your mind to prepare for the worst, when you learn to act regardless of the outcome, you take back the pen and begin writing your own story. Fear becomes just another obstacle on the road, not a wall, not a cage, but a challenge to meet with clarity and strength. So the next time fear knocks, don't run, don't suppress it, acknowledge it, embrace it, and then step forward anyway. Because in that moment, you'll realize that fear never owned you. You were always the one holding the power, and yet We spend so much of our lives in pursuit of something far less powerful. Approval. It's almost instinctual. From childhood, we learn to shape ourselves into what others will accept. At work, in relationships, even in casual social groups, we bend, mold, and perform. We tell ourselves that being liked, being praised, being accepted will finally give us peace. But the truth is, it's not approval that we're really chasing. It's alignment. What our souls truly crave is that quiet certainty that when we look in the mirror at the end of the day, we did not betray ourselves, that we spoke when we needed to, that we acted in integrity, that we stood firm even if no one applauded. That is the approval that matters most. Carl Jung once observed, "The greatest and most important problems of life are not the ones that come unexpectedly, but the ones that we refuse to acknowledge." Fear feeds on avoidance. When you refuse to name it, fear grows in the shadows. But when you drag it into the light, when you say aloud, "Yes, I might be criticized. Yes, I might fail. Yes, they might reject me," you rob it of its mystery. The fear doesn't vanish, but it loses its sting. Think about how many opportunities you've delayed, not because you weren't capable, but because the fear whispered. Too hard, too risky, too uncertain. And yet, when you finally faced those challenges, they were rarely as catastrophic as your imagination suggested. The same principle applies to rejection, criticism, or failure. When you imagine them beforehand, you build resilience in advance. You transform fear from a paralyzing unknown into a challenge you are already prepared to meet. The beauty of this practice is what it does to your self-concept. If you can picture the worst and still know that you will stand, breathe, and move forward, you begin to realize that your worth was never tied to the outcome in the first place. It was never tied to applause, approval, or acceptance. Your worth lies in how you act in alignment with your principles, even when fear stands in front of you. That is where true power is born. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Consider the great figures of history, the leaders, thinkers, and creators we admire. Do we imagine they lived without fear? Hardly. The difference was that they did not allow fear of criticism or rejection to stop them. They faced it, acknowledged it, and kept moving forward anyway. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why is that terrifying? Because it demands total honesty. It means staring at your flaws, your insecurities, and your limitations and still deciding, "I am enough." That kind of acceptance dismantles fear at its root. When you embrace yourself fully, you stop fearing rejection, because rejection can no longer define you. Think back to a difficult moment in your own life, perhaps a presentation at work, a confession in a relationship, or a leap of faith into something uncertain. Beforehand, your mind might have been racing with worst-case scenarios. What if I embarrass myself? What if they laugh? What if I fail? But the moment you played those fears through, you realized they weren't as devastating as you believed. You saw that even if those outcomes came true, you would still stand, still breathe, still live to fight another day. This is the essence of premeditatio malorum. It's not about being pessimistic. It's about preparing yourself so thoroughly that fear no longer has the power to hijack your life. By imagining the worst, you discover the strength to endure it. And with that strength, you can finally walk forward, unshaken by the unknown. The beauty of this practice is that it doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't require you to be fearless or flawless. All it asks is for your honesty, your willingness to look fear in the eye, step into the discomfort, and still choose to act with intention. And each time you do this, each time you refuse to run from the fear, you build a resilience that no one can take from you. Over time, it becomes unshakable. This doesn't mean rejection or criticism suddenly stop hurting. The sting of a no, the ache of a misstep will always be there. But when you've rehearsed these moments in your mind, when you've faced them in advance, you've already built the shield. You can feel the sting without being destroyed by it. And that's when a profound shift happens. You stop needing approval to validate your existence. You stop outsourcing your worth to the applause or silence of the crowd. Your value is grounded in something unshakable, the integrity of your own actions. When you stand in your truth, when you act in spite of fear, you take back the authorship of your life. You stop waiting for someone else to hand you permission to live. That is where true freedom lives. You don't need permission to be yourself anymore. You don't need someone else to approve your choices. You've already given yourself that permission, and once you do, fear loosens its grip. The Stoics were right. It is not the events themselves that disturb us, but the stories we attach to them. Rejection, failure, criticism, they are all part of the human experience. They cannot define you unless you allow them to. When you train your mind to prepare for the worst, when you learn to act regardless of the outcome, you take back the pen and begin writing your own story. Fear becomes just another obstacle on the road, not a wall, not a cage, but a challenge to meet with clarity and strength. So the next time fear knocks, don't run. Don't suppress it. Acknowledge it. Embrace it. And then step forward anyway. Because in that moment, you'll realize that fear never owned you. You were always the one holding the power. And yet, we spend so much of our lives in pursuit of something far less powerful. Approval. It's almost instinctual. From childhood, we learn to shape ourselves into what others will accept. At work, in relationships, even in casual social groups, we bend, mold, and perform. We tell ourselves that being liked, being praised, being accepted will finally give us peace. But the truth is, it's not approval that we're really chasing. It's alignment. What our souls truly crave is that quiet certainty that when we look in the mirror at the end of the day, we did not betray ourselves, that we spoke when we needed to, that we acted in integrity, that we stood firm even if no one applauded. That is the approval that matters most. Becoming your true self does not require applause. It requires courage. It's not about molding yourself to fit expectations. It's about shedding the layers others have forced upon you until what's left is raw, authentic, and unyielding. Integrity is not a prize handed to you by the crowd. It is an inner compass that never changes with the winds of public opinion. When you live with integrity, the question shifts. You no longer ask, "Do they like me?" You ask, "Did I live in a way that aligns with my values?" And if the answer is yes, you've already won the only approval worth having. Think about that liberating realization. The only person whose approval you truly need is the one staring back at you in the mirror. We've all felt the hollowness. That comes when we betray ourselves, when we pretend, when we conform, when we silence our truth just to please someone else. At first it feels harmless, even smart. But over time it eats away at you, piece by piece, and then something shifts. The moment you stop living for applause, you begin to reclaim those lost pieces. Each time you choose integrity over compliance, you take your power back. Epictetus captured it perfectly. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And what is more beyond our control than the opinions of others? You cannot control whether they like you, judge you, or approve of you. You cannot control their perceptions or biases, but you can control how you live. You can control whether you align with your principles. That choice, that alignment, is the soil where freedom grows. So reflect for a moment. When was the last time you stood by your convictions, even when it wasn't easy, even when it cost you something? That was the moment you touched real freedom. Maybe it was speaking your truth when it wasn't popular. Maybe it was making a difficult decision that others disagreed with. In those moments, you weren't just showing integrity to the world, you were showing it to yourself. And that kind of inner approval, the quiet knowledge that you stood firm in your values, is infinitely more satisfying than any applause or fleeting recognition. It's a peace that runs deeper than external validation. It's not earned. It's not given. It's already yours. Because when you live with integrity, when your roots sink deep into your own principles, the winds of opinion cannot move you. It no longer matters if someone criticizes, disapproves, or misunderstands you. You are anchored. The foundation of your worth is no longer fragile, dependent on shifting public opinion. It's built on the unshakable truth of who you are and what you stand for. And when you are anchored like this, you stop chasing applause. You stop begging for validation, because you already know your worth. It's easy to get caught in the endless game of seeking approval. Social media magnifies this hunger. Daily likes, shares, comments, views. Numbers that promise meaning but never deliver. But those numbers are empty reflections. They don't tell the story of your character. They don't measure your courage. They don't capture your integrity. What defines you is not the approval you gather, but the principles you embody when no one is watching. That's the true test of strength. To act with integrity not because it wins you attention, but because it aligns with your deepest values. And when you let go of the desperate need for approval, you finally step into freedom. That's when peace arrives, the kind that can't be taken away by criticism or bought with flattery. Living with integrity also means embracing yourself as you are, flaws and all. It means being honest with yourself even when the truth is uncomfortable. When you stop seeking approval, you stop wearing the masks. You show up real, raw, authentic. You stop pretending to be someone else's version of acceptable and begin reconnecting with your own humanity. And this isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity. It's about showing up without apology, without needing anyone's permission to exist as you are. How do you begin? Not with grand heroic gestures, but with small choices. Keep your word, honor your promises, align your actions with your principles, even when it costs you something. Speak your truth even when silence would win you more friends. That's where real freedom begins, because the peace you're searching for has never been in the applause of others. It's in the mirror, in those quiet, private moments when you can say with certainty, I didn't betray myself today. That's the kind of approval that endures. Because once you're anchored in your values, no criticism can shake you, and no praise can inflate you. You are rooted in truth, and that's the only approval you'll ever need. And once you've experienced that, you'll realize something profound. The approval of others was never the thing you were chasing. It was always integrity. Integrity has been the real source of power all along. You've probably heard the advice, detach from outcomes, stop caring what others think. But most people misunderstand detachment. They confuse it with apathy, with shutting down, with becoming cold. But detachment doesn't mean abandoning your emotions. It means mastering them. It's not about numbing yourself to life. It's about living with clarity. True detachment is not a withdrawal from the world, but a freedom from being enslaved by it. It means your worth is not up for debate. It cannot be inflated by praise or diminished by criticism. You don't perform to please. You don't contort yourself for validation. You simply show up fully as you are. The Stoics spoke often of detachment, but they weren't advocating for emotional emptiness. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Detachment is this simple. Stop performing goodness for the applause. Live it. Stop waiting to be approved of. Approve yourself. True detachment is strength, not coldness. It is the ability to stand in the center of life's storms and remain unmoved because you are rooted too deeply for any wind to carry away. Life is unpredictable. People are unpredictable. But when you are anchored, you are unshakable. And that's where detachment becomes freedom. Freedom to walk into any room as yourself. Freedom to stop shrinking, stop performing, stop bending. Freedom to live without apology, because your worth is not for sale. And when you understand that, you begin to move through the world with quiet power, the kind no approval can grant and no rejection can take away. It's not about playing a part, putting on a performance, or wearing a mask. It's about existing fully right here, right now, in the present moment. When you walk into a room with the unshakable knowledge that you are enough without needing to alter or edit yourself, you stop searching for signs of confirmation in other people's eyes. You stop handing over your emotional stability to the shifting tides of approval or disapproval. And in that freedom, you rediscover your power. There is nothing more liberating than simply existing without the exhausting compulsion to impress, without the need to earn your worth. You begin to realize that you had it all along. Detachment, at its core, isn't isolation. It isn't withdrawing from people or shutting yourself off from love, community, or connection. True detachment means engaging with the world wholeheartedly, but without losing yourself inside it. It means you can stand rooted in your truth even when everything around you feels uncertain or chaotic. You can love deeply, give freely, and care genuinely without attaching your self-worth to how others respond. And here lies the paradox. When you release the need for validation, your authenticity shines brighter than ever. People begin to respect You not because you chase their respect, but because you embody it. You stop running after relationships, opportunities, or approval. Instead, you walk with quiet confidence, carrying the energy of someone who already knows they are enough. That kind of presence is magnetic. Others feel it. They sense when someone is at ease in their own skin, when they don't need to extract approval from anyone to feel whole. This is not arrogance. It's the grounded strength of detachment. The true power of detachment is that you stop borrowing the world's eyes to see yourself. You no longer define your reflection by how others describe it. You begin to trust your own vision, your own voice, your own compass. And once you are grounded in that inner truth, no external storm can uproot you. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most at peace, most unshakably confident. Were they the times you were desperately seeking approval? Or were they the moments when you stood firmly in who you were, unapologetically yourself, free from the need for applause? That is detachment in action. It's not withdrawal. It's alignment. It's a refusal to be hijacked by the shifting opinions of others. And in today's world where advertisements, influencers, and cultural expectations constantly tell us who to be and what to want, this kind of detachment is more than wisdom. It's rebellion. It's a declaration that says, I am enough. I do not need to be manufactured to fit someone else's mold. When you live from this place, you stop trying to blend in, and ironically, that's when you begin to stand out. Not because you're forcing uniqueness, but because authenticity naturally separates you from the noise. True detachment is the gateway to peace. It's the freedom to show up without performance. It's not about not caring, it's about caring for yourself so deeply that you no longer sell your soul for someone else's approval. And once you've mastered this, you'll see clearly. The greatest gift you can give the world is your real, unapologetic self. But here's the next layer of the journey: boundaries. Because authenticity without boundaries is like a house without walls. It cannot stand for long. Setting a boundary isn't rude, it's honest. Yet society has conditioned us to believe otherwise. We're told that saying no is selfish, that drawing a line makes us difficult or unkind. We've been trained to be agreeable, to keep the peace, to always sacrifice for harmony. But at what cost? At the cost of ourselves. At the cost of our energy, our needs, our well-being. And when you compromise too much for too long, you wake up one day, unable to recognize who you are beneath all the pleasing. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates that protect what is sacred inside you. They are your declaration of self-respect. Without them, you surrender your sovereignty. You hand over your most valuable resources, your time, your focus, your emotional energy, to the demands of others. And here's the truth. That's not selflessness. That's slow self-destruction. It breeds resentment, exhaustion, and eventually despair. To live without boundaries is to live without a clear sense of where you end and where the world begins. But to live with boundaries is to reclaim your power. And when you fail to protect your energy, your time, and your peace, it's no wonder you begin to feel drained, disconnected, and at times even lost. Boundaries aren't weapons. They're not walls built out of bitterness or fear. They are invitations to clarity. Every time you set a boundary, you're not pushing people away. You're simply defining the conditions under which love, respect, and connection can truly flourish. A boundary is you saying, I know what I need, I know what I can give, and I know what I cannot sacrifice without betraying myself. That's not selfishness. That's maturity. And in doing so, you give others the chance to meet you with respect instead of assumption. The people who truly value you won't be threatened by your lines in the sand. They'll honor them because they'll understand that boundaries are not about rejection, they're about authenticity. As Jung wisely observed, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And he was right. Accepting yourself means owning your limits as well as your strengths. It means admitting that you're not here to please everyone, and you're certainly not here to be consumed by their demands. When you set a boundary, you're making a radical statement. I accept myself enough to defend what I need to thrive. That's not rejection, it's self-love. And when you say no to something that doesn't align with your truth, you're not rejecting a person, you're rejecting the pattern of self-abandonment that's been draining you. The reality is this: the people who are angered by your boundaries are often the very ones who benefited from your lack of them. They've grown comfortable with you bending, stretching, and sacrificing. And when you stop doing that, they feel the loss of control. But that discomfort is theirs to face, not yours to fix. Boundaries are not punishments. They are mirrors. They reveal who is willing to walk with you in mutual respect and who was only there to take. When you start drawing these lines, you'll quickly discover the difference between those who appreciate you for who you are and those who only valued you for what you gave. Yes, you may be misunderstood. Yes, people may label you as selfish or cold, but their misunderstanding is not your responsibility. The only responsibility you have is to yourself, to protect your peace, to respect your time, and to live with integrity. And in doing so, you will begin to attract relationships that are real. Relationships rooted not in exploitation, but in reciprocity. Think about it. Those who love you will not vanish when you say no. They'll listen, they'll adjust, and they'll respect your honesty. The ones who disappear, they were never truly there for you. They were only there for what you could give. And in losing them, you're not losing love. You're gaining space for real love to enter. Every boundary you set is a brick in the foundation of your self-respect. Every no you speak aloud is an affirmation that your worth is not negotiable. And with each act of courage, you discover that boundaries don't limit your freedom, they expand it. They make space for the things, the people, and the opportunities that truly nurture your growth. Boundaries are declarations. I am worthy of respect. I am committed to honoring my truth, and I will not abandon myself to make others comfortable. And when you live this way, your life changes. The people who truly care for you remain, while everyone else fades into the background. And from here, another truth emerges, one that is often overlooked. There is a quiet power in silence. We live in a culture obsessed with noise. Everyone feels the need to explain themselves, to justify their choices, to defend every boundary they set. But what if the greatest strength is not in explanation, but in restraint? What if the most powerful thing you could do in the face of criticism, manipulation, or misunderstanding is to simply remain silent? Too often, we spill words to soften our boundaries, to beg for validation, or to make others comfortable with our decisions. But in doing so, we hand over our power. Silence, on the other hand, keeps it firmly in your hands. When you hand over your voice to constant explanation, you're giving control to others. You're letting them dictate the rules of how you should speak, act, and even think. But when you stand firmly in your truth, silence becomes something different. It stops being an absence and transforms into a declaration that your worth does not need defending, a declaration that your actions speak louder than any argument you could make. Becoming who you truly are doesn't require endless justifications. It doesn't require you to convince skeptics or win over critics. It requires you to be grounded in your truth, even when the world around you is loud with opinions. The danger of constant defensiveness is that it chips away at your confidence. When you're always trying to validate your decisions through others, you eventually begin to doubt them yourself. But here's the liberating truth. Your life does not require their permission slip. Your truth is yours, not something to be bargained into smaller, more acceptable pieces. And the moment you stop explaining it, you begin to truly own it. This is where the paradox of silence reveals its strength. Silence is not weakness. It is not fear. It is not the absence of clarity. On the contrary, it is the proof that you have nothing left to prove. It's the refusal to hand your self-worth to someone else's judgment. It is you saying, "Enough has been said. Now my actions will do the talking." Think about the last time you caught yourself over-explaining, justifying a boundary, a decision, or a belief to someone. Did all those words actually help? Or did they only shift the power away from you and into their hands? Every time you defend your boundaries, you invite others to debate them, to weigh in on whether your choices are valid. And in that moment, you let them narrate your story. But what if instead you didn't explain at all? What if you simply said no and let that word stand? What if you made a choice rooted in clarity and then left it there without seeking approval? That's not arrogance. That's sovereignty. That's taking back the authority over your own life. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He was right, because once you accept yourself fully, you no longer need to explain yourself. You stop fearing judgment, because judgment has no bearing on your truth. You stop shrinking your decisions into bite-sized justifications for people who were never meant to understand you in the first place. True acceptance of self means this: you no longer argue your worth. You no longer beg to be understood. You no longer explain. Silence itself becomes your answer, your armor, and your signal of strength. It's saying, "I don't need to convince you. I am already enough." And with that, something extraordinary happens. Inner peace. The exhaustion of constantly explaining disappears. You stop wasting energy defending yourself and start living authentically instead. You realize that your worth has never come from their applause. It comes from your alignment with your own values and the quiet strength of living them out every day. Modern culture tells us otherwise. Social media pressures us to constantly show receipts, to prove our worth with likes, followers, and public explanations. But notice who carries the deepest power. It's not the loudest voices in the room. It's the ones who don't need to speak at all, because their actions, their presence, and their consistency do the work for them. Silence is an invitation. When you stop defending yourself, you invite others to truly see you, not through the words you pile up, but through the way you live. And whether they accept or reject you doesn't matter, because their opinion does not define your worth. It only reveals how irrelevant their judgment really is. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, resist it. Remember this: silence is not weakness. It is one of the greatest declarations of strength you will ever make. It tells the world you don't need validation. You don't need permission. You already stand tall in who you are, and that is enough. Silence, then, is your quiet rebellion against a world that constantly demands justification. It is not emptiness, it is presence. It is not passivity, it is power. And it is not weakness, it is the unshakable confidence that your life speaks louder than any words ever could. Respect is not something you beg for, nor is it something you negotiate for with loud words and desperate gestures. Respect is something you command, but not in the shallow, performative way society often imagines. It doesn't come from flexing muscles, flaunting achievements, or carefully curating an image for others to admire. Those are fragile currencies, easily spent and quickly forgotten. True respect comes from a different source. It begins as a quiet current within you. It is subtle, not showy, steady, not loud. You can't see it directly, but you can feel it in the way a person carries themselves, in the way they walk into a room without needing to dominate it, in the way they listen with presence and act with clarity. When your actions are aligned with your principles, when you live with integrity day after day, respect becomes magnetic. It isn't forced, and it doesn't need to be requested. People recognize it, even if they can't explain why. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." And that's where respect begins, not in the eyes of others, but in your own unflinching self-awareness. From that center, respect flows outward. It becomes a natural extension of your character. You don't need to demand it, because authenticity speaks louder than performance. In a noisy world obsessed with appearances, authenticity is rare and people are drawn to it instinctively. The truth is, the modern world often confuses attention with respect. Flashy success, luxury displays, social media clout, these things attract eyes, but not admiration. What commands true respect is different. It's how you treat people when no one is watching. It's how you carry yourself in the midst of challenge. It's how you remain still and principled when chaos tries to pull you in. And yes, there will always be people who do not respect you. Some will misunderstand your quiet strength. Others will be so consumed with their own noise that they cannot recognize authenticity when they see it. But here's the gift in that: those people were never meant to hold space in your life. Respect doesn't come from everyone, it comes from the right ones, those who recognize the steady strength inside you and are drawn to it without demand or condition. This kind of respect is enduring. It doesn't vanish when wealth dries up or when titles fade. It lasts because it is built on something deeper: your integrity, your restraint, and your consistency. Imagine walking into any space without the need to prove yourself. No need to be the loudest, the funniest, or the smartest person there. You arrive as yourself, calm, secure, unshaken. That presence alone is enough. That presence commands respect, Restraint is the hidden key. In a culture that glorifies excess words, excess reactions, excess displays, restraint becomes radical. The ability to not react, to hold your ground, to pick your battles with intention, that is self-mastery. Restraint is not suppression. It's strength under control. It's knowing when silence speaks louder than explanation, and when a calm presence carries more weight than any performance. Jung also reminded us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. When you live fully as yourself, when you stop chasing validation, when you stop bending to earn approval, respect flows to you naturally. Not because you asked for it, but because your life is living proof of your values. This has nothing to do with perfection. Perfection is an illusion, a mask that keeps you endlessly chasing. What matters is consistency. What matters is showing up for yourself, standing firm in your convictions and radiating that quiet confidence into every interaction. That's what makes people pause. That's what makes them listen. That's what makes them respect you. In the end, the deepest form of respect is the one you hold for yourself. Because when you respect yourself, your boundaries, your values, your truth, you will never feel the need to demand it from others. It will already be written in the way you live. If you are not living in alignment with your values, no amount of applause, attention, or validation will ever fill the emptiness inside. You could collect 1,000 compliments and still feel hollow. But when you live with integrity, when your choices reflect your deepest belief, you step into a form of respect that no one can take from you. And here is the beauty of it. That kind of respect doesn't fade. It doesn't vanish when opinions change, when circumstances shift, or when crowds fall silent. It is rooted in something deeper, your unshakable core. Respect born from integrity is not borrowed from others. It is owned by you. So stop chasing approval. Stop shaping yourself into someone else's idea of worthy. Live in alignment with your truth, and let your actions carry the weight of your character. Command respect not through loud demands or constant explanations, but through the quiet strength of your presence. When you do this, you'll notice something remarkable. Respect begins to follow you everywhere, not because you shouted for it, not because you fought for it, but because you earned it. Earned it through consistency, through authenticity, through restraint. And those who truly see that strength will remain in your life. Everyone else will fall away, and you'll realize that their approval was never necessary to begin with. As you walk through life, remember, your worth is not determined by applause. It is measured by the calm, steady, unwavering strength you carry within. Stand firm in who you are. Respect will follow. Thank you for spending this time with me here on StoicCraft, where we transform timeless wisdom into modern strength. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what's one boundary you've set recently that made you feel more aligned with your true self?